I want you to speak to realtors right now
Yeah.
that don't have a lot of experience in becoming a listing agent and procuring listings. And what are some specific tactical suggestions that you have as to exactly what they need to do? The second thing that I want to talk about is buyer's agents that are going to continue to represent buyers and how they can
Sure.
hone in on a value-driven presentation that not just substantiates the fees that they need to charge, but I think it needs to go further than that. I think it needs to go to a place to where you're not afraid of the conversation when you're asked the question, how much does it cost to work with you representing me as a buyer? And I think that's very different. I think it's almost like your presentation needs to be so valuable that you actually can't wait for that question to be asked because you have a great response that you're proud of. And I think that there's a place for the loan originator in that equation as well that I want to talk about. But let's first start with listing agents and some of the unique things that you shared with me in our initial conversation a week ago about things that you're advising realtors to do to become better listing agents and to find sources of listings that most realtors don't even think to look in those sources. Fire
No doubt.
away.
So I really focus, and my area of expertise has always been to focus on what I call, again, these opportunities outside your sphere of influence. And there's really 5 categories that I advise agents to focus on: the for sale by owner, the expired listing, the short sale, the absentee owner or landlord, and then what we call the homeowner. Those 5 buckets of business are where all your listing opportunities lie. Now, inside of those 5 buckets, you have a couple of groups. You have those who need to sell. You have those who really, really want to sell. And then you have what I call the casual seller, who will sell, but their motivation isn't high. We know that inside of those 5 buckets, there's always people who need to sell and really, really want to sell. So how do you get to them? Well, the beautiful part about it is that all those 5 categories are all in open sourced, available data ability to find. You can find them all. Even 98% of all FSBOs post somewhere online. So what does that mean? It means you have to be a proactive person and you have to have a very, very honed in skill set of how do you approach these homeowners. Now, you can't approach them in some of these antiquated ways. Like, for example, you can't approach for sale by owners with what I call the I got the buyer thing. They're hearing that from lots of other agents. You can't approach expired listings by saying, oh, I'm sure you had a bad experience last time, or why don't you think it's sold? So what you have to do is you have to take the methodology of approach and change it. So for example, with the for sale by owners, one of the things I recommend with for sale by owners is rather than go for the listing, go for the relationship. And what does that mean? That means when a FSBO puts their house on the market and they're on the market for less than 30 days, don't go after the listing. Figure out how to become a resource to them. And what kind of resource can you be? Well, be a resource of really different information. Don't bring them the comps, right? They can get that on their own. Go much deeper. Bring them some really, really detailed information, like varying list to price ratios, various price reduction strategies that have happened within the community. Bring them some negotiation ideas and some strategies. Actually look to become a resource with good information. Now, what's the idea? The idea is that with all the information you can give a for sale by owner or any of these categories, their difficulty is in the execution. But if during their incubation period of going from a motivated seller doing it on my own to one that becomes discouraged, and you've done the right things along the way and you've really built the relationship with them by staying in contact, by providing good information every week, by giving them updated data reports, by really becoming a valuable resource rather than just this annoying person calling looking for a listing, that's the doorway to get inside some of these opportunities. So the idea is that these 5 categories, there are different unique approaches in each one. And my whole approach from a macro level is rather than kind of position yourself as trying to sell yourself as some great reactionary agent that knows how to respond to problems and respond, position yourself as a proactive agent. Do things in a proactive manner. Bring different ideas and strategies to these individuals to give them a different sense of what your value proposition is in the relationship. Most realtors themselves believe that they get the seller more money. Well, what are you doing on like how is that really being effectuated? Rather than trying to focus on this, I'm going to sell your house for top dollar concept, why not reposition yourself as what I call a net dollar strategist? Give certain net dollar strategies and solutions and bring sellers a different perspective on what a real estate agent can even do. And I think we had talked about that earlier when we were having our conversation. This idea that we do inspections and appraisals and title searches kind of after we have a deal, all those things should be done way up front and position your sellers in a much stronger position from a negotiating position. So these properties and these deals aren't renegotiated. And that's just, I call it a risk reduction.
So let's slow that down. Let's slow that down because you're hitting on a lot of things that are really valuable. And I'm a little bit fearful that somebody might not be able to digest all this information as quickly as you're articulating it.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I'm hearing you say is to think a little bit more proactively as to how you can be unique in approaching a for sale by owner or an expired listing and have a plan. Like what I'm offering, and I think this is what you're saying, is like spend some time thinking about what is my marketing plan, my sequential plan on a week-to-week basis over the course of 6 to 8 weeks that I can easily implement. I build it one time and I put it out there and drip on people. And you could infuse into that plan something such as like a lending strategy as well. Rather than discounting the price of your home by $20,000, we might want to do a seller subsidized buy down and have a uniquely associated interest rate with this property that is 3% lower or 2% lower than the going market rate, and market the savings. And if you're a FSBO, to your point, you're going to be looking at that and going, that sounds fantastic, but I have no idea how the hell I'm going to implement that. Now you're substantiating why it might be valuable to have a listing agent, but it has to be a plan, rinse, wash, repeat.
Yeah.
You consistently deliver. The second thing that I'm hearing you say, and this is the part that I want to drill down a little bit more deeply, because I thought this was really brilliant in our conversation that we had last week, is around this idea of doing all the reports up front, right? Like explain to the listener now why that's important and how that generates this net result that is very different than the number that we're mostly fixated on, which is that gross headline number, but isn't really the important number.
Yeah. It never made sense to me when we would negotiate purchase prices only to have them renegotiated after we had a negotiated price. And that's because, and I used to say to sellers, home inspections aren't even really home inspections. They're just renegotiation tools. But these numbers are much worse because for every dollar of repair that a buyer finds, they look for $2 to $3 off in price. So what if we kind of did it differently and we did these reports up front and we not only learned of the dollar of repair, but maybe you could fix it for 50 cents. Now that wouldn't just save you $1, that would save you maybe $3 on the negotiated price. And the idea is that has an impact on a seller's net. Same thing with title. Why do a title search after weeks after, days after you have a listing or a deal, right? Because if there's an issue, the seller has to fix it. Usually it's more expensive if it's found later in the game than earlier in the game. And again, you take away from a seller's savings by taking care of these things early. And again, reinforcing this kind of net dollar way of thinking. So the idea is that, as you said, these are examples of solutions that we can put in place for sellers that really speak to a better net dollar experience. You had mentioned about the seller concession, maybe the most misunderstood tool in the industry. And if sellers now are going to be faced with making these decisions about money to offer, whether it's a buyer agent, well, again, this is a great door open for a financial partner to be with you at a listing appointment. Talk to a seller about if you're going to offer something, maybe you might want to offer a buyer commission, or maybe in lieu of a buyer commission, maybe you offer a buy down on an interest rate. Now, if we're looking to attract a buyer, what might be more attractive to that buyer? Money out there to pay a realtor, or money out there that I could take and use to buy down my rate on the mortgage? That's another marketing perspective. So these are all, and we also know that if a seller offers a seller concession towards closing costs, well, that actually can mean less money out of the pocket of the seller than actually lowering the price. Because you and I know, and we want to make sure, and this is where loan officers really need to explain this well, that a dollar offered as a seller concession is much more valuable to a buyer than $1 of price reduction, right? Because they get to realize that benefit right up front. So these are the kinds of strategies and communication. And again, we've used the word, or you use the word listing presentation or buyer presentation. I actually call it a listing education and a buyer education, because that's really what it needs to be. And there are no shortage of really kind of unique things. And some of these things, some agents and some loan officers know at a large level, but you really got to dig down into those details and make it part of not just your marketing plan, but I call it your merchandising strategy, right? Merchandising is a very different concept than marketing. It's a different concept than advertising. Merchandising is using creative solutions to really attract a consumer to want to come and touch your product. Advertising is simply the awareness. Marketing is simply the awareness. But merchandising creates an emotion in a consumer to want them to come touch and see the product. And there's no more emotional sale in the business, in any industry, than homes. Get a buyer to a home, and their whole mindset can change on their purchase decision and their negotiation decisions and their ability to want to pay more money for it. Nobody has created a helmet yet where people will buy a house online. People are buying cars online, but they still want to test drive them. And I don't think we're in a place yet where people are going to buy a home just online without seeing it. So they still have to get there. So using some of these merchandising tactics, using some of what I call these proactive solutions. And there's other proactive solutions. I mean, not only can we use this buy down as a way to improve the buyer's interest rate, but there are some other things that we can do as listing agents in conjunction even with financial partners that are really unique. Like, for example, I think we talked about the pre-approval. I've been a big advocate of not being a fan of pre-approvals because they often don't go very deep and very wide. We have this thing called LP and DU, and it's really a kind of like it's the AI version of our industry that we've had. And listing agents and buyer's agents have relied upon pre-approvals forever, but go deeper. Start bringing your loan officer into an LP or DU analysis and start doing these things up front very early. Rather than go into contract with a buyer that's pre-qualified or pre-approved, make sure that they're LP or DU vetted. And again, while nothing is a guarantee, it's a much deeper, it's much more analytical, it's much more predictive over what could or could not go bad. And those are other ways in which you can articulate to sellers about how you do business. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I don't rely upon a pre-approval to engage in negotiations. I'm going to look for an LP or DU vetting up front. So that will kind of give me a sense of buyer quality, and that might change the direction of negotiations based upon the quality of what that LP or DU looks like. Again, these are examples of ways in which realtors and, quite frankly, and loan officers can recalibrate on how they articulate and how they do business and how they can bring more value to their sellers and quite frankly, also to the buyers. You mentioned, what can I do as a buyer's agent to
We'll get there. We'll get there in a sec. I want to definitely go to buyer's agents and how they can partner with lenders. And you kind of tiptoed into that just now with the DO and LP thing. Yeah. But back to the listing agent side, I mean, I think that what you're sharing here is extremely important and very brilliant. In our dialogue that we had, a week or so ago, I referenced the fact that I had a substantial dollar figure associated with all of the reports that the buyer did on the home once we were entered into contract. Right. And we both know that once you enter into a contract, especially if you're the seller, you start to emotionally move on from this home that is yours that you're living in, and you start making plans for a new home and lining up moving vans and all of that. And while that's all happening, you've got the buyer that's doing this, diagnostic on the house with a whole bunch of outside service providers that actually have an incentive to jack up the price associated with their estimates. The chimney guy comes in at $9,700 on a chimney that I've been using for 5 years without any problem at all. And the termite guy tells you that you need an entire decking replaced where it's like debatable whether you need to, et cetera, et cetera. And what you're highlighting here that I think is so brilliant is I wish that my agent would have come to me prior to and said, look, The last thing in the world that I want to have happen is to enter into a contract with a prospective buyer and then give them free reign over the property and doing their own assessments of what's wrong with this property so they can, as you point out, renegotiate with you on your sales price once you've already entered into a contract. Let's get out in front of that. Let's, make sure that whatever repairs we think we need to make, and as you pointed out perfectly, at 50 cents on the dollar rather than $3 on the dollar, we get those done. And then that way, when they come back with their own set of reports, if they choose to do them, and they may just choose to not do them because they may look at these reports and say, you know what, I'm not going to spend the money on my own report because I'm looking at this one and all this was remediated. If they choose to do so, at least you have a leg to stand on in your negotiations back with them. Whereas in my case, I didn't. Right? This is the first set of termite reports. This is the first chimney report. This is the first soils engineering report that I had seen. And all I knew was that the number came out to an awfully big number. And I either had to run the risk of losing the deal or renegotiate the sales price, which is what I did, and kind of eat a large chunk of money. So, but I think that in closing, Scott, and this is what I really love about the approach that you're taking, and I want everybody to hear, is that you're breaking the norm with so many of the things that you're talking about. You're creating differentiation from every other real estate agent that you're competing against in the way that you're presenting yourself. You're showing uniqueness, you're educating, you're adding value up front, whether it be for a FSBO that you don't have yet, or an expired that you're trying to procure, or just somebody that you got off the street. And that's the part that I really want everybody to be taking away from this is, how do you take 2 steps backwards and ask yourself the question, what do they want? I kind of call this empathic marketing. Like, what does that person that I'm marketing to, that I'm selling to, really want and need? And how can I provide that and be unique and different so as to win the business, or better said, earn the business, which is what we should all be doing.